the lieutenant governor. This is the second highest office, and so you get, I'm sure you'll have a big showing for the governor's candidates. People will show up because that's, that office is critically important. What the governor does is life or death, day-to-day sort of things that affect, you know, whether to call up the National Guard, whether to commute a death sentence, what impact over the state budget. It's a huge position, and so I'm assuming you'll probably have a lot of people here. What most people don't understand is that this position right here is one heartbeat away from that position. So when you look at this office, the Secretary of State's office, I think that it's important, both as voters and as candidates, that we take a very close look and make sure that not only are we prepared for the day-to-day duties of the Secretary of State's office, which is primarily over the state's elections and overseeing that process, but that we're also prepared and that you're comfortable with the candidate should they be required to move on and become the governor. And in Arizona, 4 of the last 8 Secretaries of State have done that. So it's not pie in the sky sort of situation. How many of you were here at the Sun City Westfield 1 week ago? Okay. Several hands. And I said that because I'm trying to figure, you know, how much of my background should I share with you? Because I'm a 5th generation Arizonan. Was born in Mesa, grew up in Yuma, got an accounting degree from Arizona State University, a law degree from Georgetown with honors, one of the top law schools in the nation. Started my legal career as a legal advisor to the Chief Justice of the Arizona Supreme Court. I got to see the judiciary from a perspective that not many people, and even lawyers, get to see, helping them draft their opinions and understanding what causes judges to think as they do. And that's critically important in an office like the Secretary of State's office, of course, because you may be, how many of you heard about the decision a few days ago out of the Kansas Federal District Court? If you have, some, not as many. That decision reinstated our ability to require proof of citizenship with our voter ID forms. Now that'll probably get appealed, but this is a very important time where we need people in offices like these who will be able to understand the laws. And I believe that my background and experience and my legal training best qualifies me for that particular position. And I've been in the private sector for about the last 10 years. I've briefed and argued cases on behalf of clients, both public, private, nonprofit, and all the way up to the courts of appeals. I understand the needs of the private sector, small business, large business, everything that makes our economy tick. And so I believe that when you take my background in the private sector, combine it with the fact that I'm also a state representative in the Arizona House of Representatives. I'm in my 2nd term, where I've worked on policies important to the conservative cause. Limited government, efficient government, government that works for the people and not the other way around. And I can tell you that you can take my word for it, that I'm a true conservative, or you can take the fact that the largest conservative organization in the country, the American Conservative Union, CPAC, how many of you have heard of CPAC? A couple weeks ago, I was invited to come to Washington, D.C. and speak on the main stage with several other of our conservative leaders in the country. I was chosen as one of the top 10 under 40 in the country. So I'm 39 years old, so I just squeaked in under that 40 mark. But I was chosen because of my record and they see me as one of the 10 in the country, conservative leaders of the future. And I took the stage I spoke right after Governor Chris Christie and right before Governor Bobby Jindal. As I was coming to the stage, Governor Christie said good luck. As I was leaving the stage, Governor Jindal said good job. And then I went back to the room and there was Senator Mike Lee, and Senator Marco Rubio is now taking the stage, and Senator Ted Cruz had spoken just a couple of speakers before me. And I'm looking around that room and I'm realizing I'm the only one in that room that I have never heard of. And it was truly an honor to be there with those people and see those conservative leaders. And I promise you that I'm one of those conservative leaders, and that I would ask for your support and for your vote in this election. I'm running for Secretary of State. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Well, I too appreciate being out here today and having all of you show up on this beautiful Saturday. My name is Michelle Reagan, and for the last 12 years, I have served at the state capitol, at your state capitol. I served 8 years in the Arizona House. 6 of those years, I was the chair of the Commerce Committee. And the Commerce Committee was a very powerful committee. Youngest female, by the way, to hold that position. A lot of people didn't think I could do it, didn't think I could go up against the big unions or hold my own against some of the large assaults that we seem to take in our economic community when it, as regards to the fact that we're a non-union state. We want to keep it that way. The fact that we are a right-to-work state. Very, very important right-to-work status in Arizona. And the Commerce Committee during that time was able to lay the foundation and lay the groundwork for what would become the jobs bills that we've passed the last couple of years. I was very instrumental in making the corporate income tax rate, making sure that that gets lowered. In the personal property tax, the business personal property tax, and changing how that affects small businesses and making sure that they pay a lower rate. And now I'm over in the Senate, and I'm the chair of the Elections Committee. And the Elections Committee is a new committee. The state hasn't had one before. And we are focusing on some of the things that Arizona does right in elections, and also some of the things Arizona does wrong. Now, we were fortunate that one of the things that we have this week, that was iffy in the state, with the fact that we, the people, want to be able to prove that somebody is who they say they are when they're voting, which, silly to me that would even end up in a court case. We were lucky that that was upheld this week. But there's also a lot of other things going on in our voting arena. And the biggest thing that we're worrying about in Arizona is the ability for groups to go and mass collect ballots. Now, I don't know if in any of your neighborhoods and out here, if you've had groups go door to door collecting ballots. I hope not, but if you have, that should be a big concern to you. We have groups, and then generally on the other side of the aisle, collecting thousands of ballots and turning them in on general election day. Now, some of you are looking at me saying, well, that can't possibly happen. Well, it does happen, because in Arizona, it's completely legal. Arizona is one of the only state that allows this nefarious activity. It is absolutely insane and unheard of in any other state. There are a lot of things like this in the elections arena that we've set out, that we've identified, first of all, which was a big step, and that we're setting out to fix. A little bit about myself. Before I got involved in politics, I worked in our family-owned business called Fast Signs. I was actually out here when this was being built, putting some of the signs together, and I kind of chuckled as I drove by because some of them are still up. The Arts Center one and some of those were the ones that my family's business did. We grew that company to be the largest one of its kind in the country and sold it. And the reason why I got into politics was to be a voice for businesses like ours, to be a voice for keeping government off people's back, to be a voice for keeping taxes lower and keeping mandates lower than our surrounding states. We have a wonderful business climate in Arizona, and we want to keep it that way. So that's when I got involved in politics, and I was fortunate enough, as I said, to be able to be involved in economic activity right at the very beginning. And Justin mentioned and did a great job of mentioning what the Secretary of State does as far as being the de facto lieutenant governor. But the Secretary of State's office is also a very administrative position. It does two main things, and I really call it the keeper of the public trust. But the two functions, the day in, day out functions of the Secretary of State's office, are monitoring the state's business filings, which can be very complex at times, and overseeing the state's election system. And I hope that after today, if you look at what I've done in the legislature, going on my 12th year, the two areas of law that I have really focused in on, that I have become immersed in, have been economic policy and election law. That is exactly what the Secretary of State's office is, what it does, and its main function. So I hope to be able to earn your support today. Again, my name is Michelle Reagan, and it's wonderful to be here. Does anybody
minute questions? No? All right, we're going to start with Justin first, and then Michelle will have a chance to answer the same question. Okay, the question is, do you support the ruling on a birth certificate to register to vote? And how will you enforce it?
Do you want us to stand? Does that make it easier? Because I'm looking at people in the back and can't see, so I'm just going to pull this up and stand when I answer. I support identification. I don't know that it necessarily needs to be a birth certificate, but I do support identification. It's interesting. I was at a focus group last night, and it's amazing to me. There are people who feel that because there is no requirement that you have any sort of identification in terms of a driver's license, for example, unless you want to drive a car. Well, those are all privileges. And this person, and there were a few people in this focus group that said they draw the line between privileges and rights, and voting is a right, therefore you shouldn't be required to have an ID to vote. And it just, to me, I disagree with that position. I believe that it's critically important that we know who's voting in our elections. I understand that it's a right, but that's a right that it affects the rest of our rights too, because if people are voting and they shouldn't be, and we know that that's happening. In fact, in the same focus group last night, it was a focus group, and one person said, I keep getting ballots in the mail at my house. And I said, was this somebody that used to live at your house? They said, no, I've lived at my house for 30 years. But for some reason, something's getting mixed up in the process. Well, we know that those sorts of things are happening. We've got to do everything within our power to protect the integrity of our voting system. And I believe that one of the critical elements of that is making sure that people who are voting have proven that they are eligible to vote. Does it need to be a birth certificate? I don't necessarily believe it has to be a birth certificate, but it needs to be some level of identification that we have confidence in is correct.
Absolutely, I support people showing identification when they vote. The Secretary of State's office, as well as the county recorders, have set out a list of the approved identification. It gets a little touchy when you're talking about birth certificate, because for some people tracking down their birth certificate is a little tough, and especially in the groups that we've heard this from are the tribal populations, and also in some of the elderly communities where you don't have your birth certificate necessarily readily available. But there is a list of approved identification. The key is making sure that the federal government doesn't come and overturn our desire to make sure people show ID when they're registering and show ID when they're voting. We also do have a big problem with ballots going out to places where they shouldn't be going out, where people are no longer there. That is an issue that I worked with the county recorders on, all 15 county recorders from around the state, to make sure that when a live ballot is being sent to someone's home, that it's going to the right place and not to where someone lived several years ago. And I find it interesting when I looked up some of the requirements to vote in other countries, because we keep hearing when we say register or ID for registration, and some people seem horrified by the thought. So I looked up, what do other countries require for voting? Very interesting. Our neighbor to the south, in many cases, in order to vote, to get their voter privileges, they need to be fingerprinted. So this is nothing that should be showing ID at the polls or showing ID to show who you are when you're registering. It should not be seen as obnoxious. It absolutely should be mandatory. So I'm glad that was upheld again this week, and we hope that continues.
Okay, we'll start with Michelle first this time. What will you do to make the Secretary of State website more user-friendly and transparent?
There are a lot of things we want to do to that website. The biggest thing, when I look at what other states do for transparency for the public, the biggest thing we found is that they have live or real-time reporting. And what does that mean? What that means is that when I do something, or when I spend money as a candidate or accept money as a candidate, I do file reports, and those reports are kind of sporadic. In a non-election year, you only file a report once a year. But the thing is not only is that in many states that reporting more frequent, but it's also a lot more interactive. When I file my financial disclosure papers in Arizona, they're on paper, and I hand walk them up to the Secretary of State's office, and they're accepted and scanned and then put online. In this day and age, with all of the technology we have going on, we're still turning in paper forms the Secretary of State's office to be scanned. Those kind of things should be online. They should be easy for us to do. They also should be easy for the public to access and do searches. So if you want to pull up a particular lobbyist name or a particular interest group's name and see who they've contributed to, how much, what's the interaction between them and people holding office, you should be able to do that. You can't do that now. It is not a searchable database. It is, it's come a long way since when I first started, but it has a long way to go, especially in this day and age, like I said, where most people are doing things from their phones. I always tease the Secretary of State that he should have an app. He should have his own app where I am able to file my information, my financials electronically. So a lot of work to do there, and something that I'm pretty well versed in. So look forward to hopefully being able to implement some of that stuff.
Begin my answer to this question by saying that you may be familiar that the person on the Democrat side of the aisle running for this office is Terry Goddard, and he's got a clear path. Nobody's running against him. There was going to be somebody, but they have this way of eliminating their competition early in the process. And so, regardless of what happens in this race, a Michelle Reagan or a Justin Pierce is going to be a heck of a lot better than a Terry Goddard. So we certainly are going to come together when the primary is over and work for whoever our candidate is, because that's truly important. I preface my answer with that because what you're going to hear from both Michelle and I are probably very similar on a lot of these things. And I will say ditto to her answer. This is a very technical question on what can be done to make that website better. Maybe the question could be, what could be done to make the website better? And that's not a hit on the current secretary by any stretch. There are a lot of things that have to happen on that website because there's so much information. But to me, if you've been on that website, do you feel like it's information overload? I do, at least. It seems like there are too many links that it's hard to determine which links go where. And so I believe that what really needs to be looked at is a global fix of how the website is laid out and what links take you to different places and make those more user-friendly. I think that we can do that. And then to some of the specifics, I agree with Michelle, some of the real-time filing. And isn't it amazing that in 2014, in January of 2014, I had to fill out a financial disclosure form because I'm in office right now, and I had to walk it up to the 7th floor of the Secretary of State's office, and I had to raise my hand and swear that it was true and sign it in front of them, and then they stamped it and they put it in a file and I got a copy of it. We do that stuff all the time online now in other areas that are absolutely safe and secure, and we ought to be able to submit those forms online. It is fine for me. I go down to the Capitol every day, but this is a big state, and I can tell you we have people serving in offices all around this state, in Mojave County, Bullhead City, that drive an awful long ways, Nogales, who drive an awful long ways just to go up there and file that report. So I believe that these are the types of things that any Secretary of State is going to need to look at to determine how can we become more user-friendly and create a system that it truly is transparent. Because when the public goes to that website right now, I'm not sure they really know how to navigate it. I have a hard time navigating it, which means that it's not as transparent as it needs to be. I'm first now.
We did that way. Okay, as Secretary of State, if you are to become governor, what will be your 3 top priorities?
Budget, budget, and budget. I'll try and think of another 2 while I'm talking about the budget, but this is incredibly important. Let's go back 10 years. You look at some of the budgets of the past, of the Napolitano era. First, you had budgets that grew exponentially and outpaced our growth, outpaced our population growth, everything. Because we were showing all these good revenues coming in. Times were flush. And while some other responsible states were going, you know, we probably ought to make sure that we don't blow this, Arizona instead made some mistakes and spent way too much, which is why then, as in Napolitano's last year, her last budget, by the way, was still, Republican leaders were screaming, we've got to start cutting. We've got to start. You might remember the state treasurer, Dean Martin, was out there screaming, cut, cut. And Napolitano came in and says, okay, we will cut. And she cut a little bit. And guess what happened then? When Governor Brewer took office, $3 billion shortfall in a budget of, $9, $10 billion. That's a huge, we were per capita the largest budget deficit in the country. We were worse than the People's Republic of California, if you can imagine that. That's the situation we got ourselves in from overspending early on and then not pulling back the reins later. It's critically important that the person who is your governor, whether it's the governor you vote for or the governor that becomes that because of this office, that that person understands the importance of fiscal responsibility in this state. That we keep that budget to a level that does not outpace our growth, that reduces the burden on our citizens. And when we have those extra revenues, how about this for an idea? Give it back to the people who overpaid. That's my philosophy, and I think that that's what you would want in the governor's office. I'll cover a couple things since I've probably got 30 seconds to do it. So obviously, I believe that it's critically important that we continue to work on issues that foster freedom and liberty in our state. And that touches on the issues of governments, local governments that overburden citizens, whether it be with overly restrictive gun laws, for example. We spend a lot of time at the legislature making sure that those folks don't overly restrict the rights of the citizens. And obviously, I think that I will always stand for the rights of the unborn. And I believe that as a Republican, that is something that is critically important, that if we can't protect life, if we can't protect those who can't protect themselves, then what can we protect? So I would continue to support those measures that protect life, that protect liberty and the pursuit of happiness, and obviously encompassed in all of that is responsible fiscal leadership of the state.
The budget is very, very important. The budget is one of the first things that the governor does at the beginning of every legislative session, puts out her budget, puts out her or his revenue forecasts, and then the legislature works and we do our own budget, and we hope that at the end that they match up. Having a governor that understands that legislative process and that understands the budget process is very, very important. Proud that last week on Thursday, golly, it was a long week, 2 days ago, the Senate was able to pass a budget that was a pretty darn good budget. And we did it with all Republicans locking arms together and saying, we want to hold the line. And actually the governor wants us to spend a little more. So now it's going to be up to these guys in the House to hold that budget down. So yes, the budget's very important. Economic growth is also incredibly important. When we talk about economic growth, it's not just attracting companies here, but it's encouraging the ones that are already here to grow and to thrive and to do better and hire more people. I always had a problem when I was in the private sector of why does government think it's a bad thing to make money? We should want our small businesses and our large businesses succeeding. That is a very important function of the governor. And I also would like whoever is the next governor to really focus on border security. we hear everybody talk about that on the campaign trail, and then 2 years goes by and nothing happens, and then, you know, we're back in front of you saying the same thing again. I thought it was a little encouraging that it seems like there's a couple of bills in Congress, one of them that may have some momentum I was reading about this morning, that focuses on border security. But for anyone who's traveled the state, you go down to parts of our state, and the federal government has signs up warning us, the American citizen, that it's not safe to be in a particular area when that's America and not another country. That's a really, really big deal. And again, I'm not going to belittle or poke at the current administration, because people do what they can do and they do the best they can. But I would really, really like to see someone on the 9th floor that is focused on actually doing something down there and making sure it's safe for the people that live in that area.
You can, that was going to be the stop. 30 seconds left.
We're efficient.
Okay. If you could change one thing as Secretary of State, what would it be?
The biggest thing I would want to change is make sure that there is absolutely no voter fraud in our state. That people who are voting are citizens, that we know who they are supposed to be voting, that we don't have, the entire system hinges on the fact that when you cast your ballot, your voice is being heard in a timely manner, that the system is safe, secure, and that there's accountability. And we've seen some holes in that. It hasn't gotten a lot of attention until the last couple of years, but that is the most fundamental right that you have for your voice to be heard, is to vote. And you need to make sure that your vote counts.
I'm going to agree. I'm going to explain what I think is probably the single most important thing that can be done in that regard. And in fact, Michelle ran a bill about this last year, and when it came through the Senate, it came over to the Judiciary Committee in the House. I vice chair that committee, and we heard some incredible testimony that should scare the heck out of us, and that is this ballot bundling issue, and people showing up to polls with carrying, sometimes hundreds. We had one that it was in the thousands. They had a trunk full of ballots. They'd gone around, and they'd gone to these neighborhoods and started, gathering. They called people that, hey, we're going to come pick up your ballot. And there are other things that go on in that as well. I won't take up a lot of time talking about that, but we're the only state that does that. And the ones that fight us on this, they say, well, no, this is just about making sure that those voices are heard. And so people get attacked, like me, like Michelle, for saying, well, no, we think that it's really probably not too much of a burden to have you go turn it in yourself. We had people testify in our committee about how, that to get to the polls on election day was so burdensome, and I thought, that's really kind of an affront to those who fought so hard and bled and died. And you think of the minority groups and others who fought for and died for the right to vote, and you got that right now, and you're going to tell me it's too hard to get down to the polling place or to take that ballot that you got in the mail and put a stamp on it ahead of time? It's just, to me, it's illogical, and so those arguments, they fall on deaf ears in my mind, but they get traction on the community of the left, and they say this is an attempt to suppress our vote, when we're just trying to say, no, don't go gathering up a bunch of ballots. We don't know where those ballots came from. And again, we're the only state that does this. So to me, voter fraud is the biggest issue that we would tackle and change in the Secretary of State's office. To me, the number one first best way to do that, because there are some other things we can do, would be to eliminate this practice of allowing people to show up with bundles of ballots at the ballot box.
That's right.
standing questions.
Why do you want to be Secretary of State?
Hopefully I covered most of that question in my introduction, but I'm very concerned about our right to vote. I believe that it needs to be protected, and it needs to be protected by somebody who has a record and ability to do that. Again, when you look at my more than a decade of experience in the legal field, and we talk about these election laws and the laws associated with all of these things, I've dealt with these laws on a daily basis. I understand how to present cases in court. I understand how to get to the bottom. I've personally conducted investigations. I've been brought in to personally and oversee investigations of fraud, misconduct, harassment at the highest levels, again, of both private, public, nonprofit organizations. So I understand how to get to the bottom of these things, and I understand we're going to continue to see legal challenges to these laws that are so important to those of us in this room. I can tell you one of the very first things I would do, because this Kansas case is going to go up on appeal. Chris Kobach, that's how you say his name, he is the Secretary of State for Kansas. He is also a lawyer. He argued the case in that federal district court. He will probably argue the case at the Court of Appeals when it goes up. I want to be sitting next to him, and because of my bar license, I will be able to do that. I want to be sitting next to him, and I want to be able to help in that process. And I believe that when you look at the skill set that I bring to the table, that I am highly qualified for this office, and in addition, am highly qualified to take on that next office if it should be required.
I want to be Secretary of State, and I think I would be really good at it because it's what I've been working on the last several years. The issues that the Secretary of State is in charge of. About 8 or 9 years ago, the Secretary of State's office started having me run their omnibus bills. Those just mean big bills with lots of things in them. Where the Secretary of State's office deals with notaries, it deals with business filings, it deals with wills, it's the keeper of the public record. It deals with a lot of things that I've already been working on. So why would I want it to do the job? Well, I think I'd be really, really good at it. I also think that experience is key. And it's wonderful to be an attorney. But you don't need to be an attorney to be able to pick up the phone and call Chris Kobach, like I did last week, and talk to him about some of the issues that we're facing in our state and some of the issues that were coming through my committee that I had questions on. It is an incredibly overlooked position. And that's why I, again, applaud you for coming out this morning and learning more about Justin and I, because so few people even understand what the office does. But to be able to, what I call and many people look at the Secretary of State's office as the keeper of the public trust in all different areas. That's the office that oversees that. And I think experience is really, really important. Experience in those issues. Who has worked with the county recorders, all 15 of them? Who's worked with all 15 election